Detective Ethan Reed sat at his cluttered desk, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the case files strewn before him. The precinct was nearly empty, the late hour leaving only the hum of the flickering fluorescents for company. That's when he noticed it. A plain envelope, no postmark, no return address, slipped under his door. His name was scrawled across the front in jagged, hurried handwriting, the ink slightly smudged as if the writer's hand had trembled. He slit the envelope open with a pocket knife, the paper inside brittle with age. The message was brief: Detective Reed, your skills are needed. Strange occurrences plague St. Mary's Church. Come at midnight. You are the only one who can uncover the truth. It was signed A Friend, but Ethan couldn't place the name. His instincts told him to dismiss it. Anonymous tips were rarely trustworthy. But something about the letter tugged at him. The church had been abandoned for years, its history marred by rumors of disappearances and unexplained horrors. Curiosity gnawed at him. He'd always been drawn to the unsolved, the inexplicable. Before he could second-guess himself, Ethan grabbed his coat and flashlight, the weight of his service pistol a comfort at his hip. The rain had started by the time he reached his car, the droplets tapping impatiently against the windshield as if urging him forward. As he pulled up to the crumbling facade of St. Mary's, the clock struck 12. The church loomed against the stormy sky, its broken spire jutting like a skeletal finger. Ethan hesitated, his breath fogging in the cold air. Every rational thought screamed at him to turn back, but the mystery was too compelling. He stepped inside, the heavy door creaking shut behind him, sealing him in the darkness. The investigation had begun, and so had something far worse. The crumbling stone steps of St. Mary's groaned under Ethan's boots as he approached the church, the moonlight casting jagged shadows through the skeletal remains of the roof. The air was thick with the cloying scent of rot, something far older than the moldering wood and damp stone. It clung to the back of his throat, making each breath feel heavy and weighted. As he pushed open the creaking door, the whispers began. Barely audible at first, they slithered through the empty hall like tendrils of smoke, his name uttered in fragmented breaths. Ethan. His flashlight flickered as he swept the beam across the nave, illuminating rows of dust, shrouded pews and the shattered remains of stained glass scattered across the floor. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against him, and he turned sharply toward the large, broken window above the altar. A silhouette stood there, too still, too dark, watching. Its edges seemed to bleed into the shadows, its face an indistinct smear. Ethan's pulse spiked, but when he blinked, the figure was gone. A gust of wind howled through the gaping holes in the walls, carrying with it another whisper, closer this time. It sounded almost sorrowful, as if the voice itself were trapped in the bones of the building. The floorboards groaned beneath him, a sound too deliberate to be mere decay. Something had breathed. Something had shifted. He took a step forward, and the whisper surged, rising into a chorus of murmurs just beyond comprehension. The air grew colder and his breath fogged before him. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement. A ripple in the darkness, a shape darting between the pews. But when he spun to face it, there was nothing. Only the creeping certainty that he was not alone. That something had been waiting for him. That it had called him here. Beneath the crumbling altar, the floorboards creaked under Ethan's weight as he pried them loose, revealing a hidden compartment caked in dust. Inside lay a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The cover bore the faded initials RFMF, and the spine cracked open with a brittle sound as though unwilling to share its secrets. The first entry was dated October 3, 1957, exactly 65 years ago tonight. Father Marcus Cole's handwriting was hurried, his ink blotted in places as if his hand had trembled. The children speak of shadows in the pews, of whispers in the confessionals. The bishop dismisses it as superstition, but I have heard them too. Something lingers here, something that should not be. Ethan flipped further, the entries growing more frantic. Father Cole spoke of research, of ancient rites meant to cleanse unhallowed ground. Then, the tone shifted, fear bled through the words. The ritual was a mistake, the tone was corrupted, the Latin inverted. We did not banish it, we invited it in. A loose page slipped free, brittle as dried leaves. The final entry, smeared with what looked like darkened fingerprints, was a single line: it has taken Malachi. God forgive us, it wears his face now. A gust of wind howled through the shattered windows, and the diary snapped shut as if pulled by unseen fingers. The whispers, which had been distant, suddenly hissed in unison just behind Ethan's ear. Marcus was weak. But you will last longer. The whispers slithered through the rotting pews of St. Mary's Church, no longer indistinct murmurs but sharp, cutting words. Ethan spun around, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness as he strained to pinpoint their source. The voice was fragmented as though spoken by a chorus of the damned. Ethan, come closer, his pulse hammered in his throat. The air tasted stale, thick with the scent of mold and something far worse, like spoiled meat left too long in the sun. Shapes shifted at the edges of his vision, fleeting and grotesque. Dark silhouettes crouched between the broken pews, their forms warping like smoke. Ethan twisted toward a low groan, but the rows of decaying wood were empty, except for the unmistakable impression of hands gripping the pew backs, fingers curled as if in prayer. A child's giggle echoed from the altar, high-pitched and wrong. His skin prickled, he wasn't alone. Then came the touch, frigid press against the nape of his neck, the scrape of nails over his shoulder. Ethan gasped, whirling to strike out at empty air. His breath came in ragged bursts, fogging before him despite the oppressive heat. The whispers didn't stop. They slithered into his ears, viscous as oil. "We see you, we know you." His flashlight flickered, dimming as though drained of power. The figures in the pews twitched, their elongated limbs unfolding in the gloom. A hiss rose behind him, close, too close, and Ethan recoiled just as something unseen grabbed his wrist. The icy grip burned like frostbite. He yanked free, stumbling back, and his boot connected with something soft. Looking down, he saw the remains of a desiccated rat, its corpse twisted in agony. The whispers erupted into laughter. The church pulsed around him, alive, hungering, and then silence. The figures stilled. The air turned gelid. Ethan's breath hitched as the whispers condensed into a single, guttural command to stay. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps as he stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shattered mirror leaned against the decaying wall of the church's sacristy, its cracked surface reflecting the dim glow of his flickering flashlight. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The reflection was wrong. The face staring back wasn't his. The features were twisted, the eyes hollow and black, the mouth stretched into a grin too wide for any human face. The figure in the mirror moved independently, its lips forming words Ethan couldn't hear. He pressed a hand to his own mouth, as if to confirm it wasn't his own reflection mimicking him. The air grew colder, his breath visible in sudden, icy plumes. The whispers from earlier had grown into a chorus buzzing in his skull like static. His skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. He tore his gaze away, but the reflection didn't vanish. Instead, it raised a hand, pressing its palm against the glass from the other side. The cracks in the mirror pulsed like veins, spreading further with a sound like splitting bone. Ethan's flashlight sputtered, the light dying for a horrifying second before flaring back to life. When he looked again, the figure was closer, its face now pressed against the glass, eyes bulging, mouth open in a silent scream. A voice, deep, guttural, rose from the darkness behind him. "Do you see me now, detective?" Ethan spun around, but there was nothing there. When he turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. Only his own terrified face remained. But the cold lingered, and the whispers grew louder, forming a single word over and over: Malachi. The church groaned around him, as if the walls themselves were alive. Ethan knew, whatever was here, it wasn't done with him yet. The diary's pages crumbled at Ethan's touch, the ink faded but still legible. The final entry was written in a frantic hand, the words smeared as if the priest had been in a desperate hurry. It spoke of a ritual, an attempt to cleanse the church of a vengeful presence that had taken root within its walls. The priest, whose name Ethan now knew was Father Malachi, had believed he could banish the entity through prayer and sacred rites. But something had gone wrong. The spirit had resisted, twisting the ritual into something darker. The ink turned to a rusty brown in one chilling passage. "It is not gone. It is inside me now." Ethan's breath hitched as the whispers around him sharpened, forming words. "Malachi," they hissed, the name slithering through the air like a curse. The shadows in the pew stirred, shifting as if alive. The diary's last line was a warning, scrawled in jagged letters: "Do not let it find another." Of Ethan's hands trembled as he realized the truth. Father Malachi had become the very thing he sought to destroy. And now, the spirit was hunting for a new vessel. The temperature plummeted, his breath visible in the frigid air. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices, all repeating the same name: Malachi, Malachi. A gust of wind howled through the broken windows, extinguishing the candle Ethan had lit. In the sudden darkness, he felt something brush against his neck, cold, skeletal fingers. He spun around, but the church was empty, yet the presence was undeniable, pressing in from all sides. The diary had revealed the truth, but it was too late. The ritual had failed, and now Ethan was trapped in its aftermath. The spirit had found him. The sudden slam of the church doors echoed through the hollow nave like a gunshot, cutting off Ethan's only escape. He spun around, heart pounding, but the heavy wooden doors were sealed tight, as if fused by an unseen force. The beam of his flashlight flickered once, twice, then died, plunging him into suffocating darkness. The air grew thick, pressing against his skin like a suffocating shroud. A voice, deep and guttural, resonated from the shadows. "You are mine now." It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, slithering into his ears and wrapping around his mind. Ethan staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers he'd heard earlier now swelled into a chorus, chanting a name: Malachi. The floor beneath him trembled, dust raining from the crumbling ceiling. Then he saw it, the shadow. It peeled itself from the walls, shifting like smoke given form. It reached for him with elongated fingers, skeletal and insubstantial yet radiating a hunger that made Ethan's blood freeze. He tried to scream, but his voice died in his throat as the thing drew closer. The reflection he'd seen in the mirror, the twisted, grinning face, was now standing before him, its hollow eyes boring into his soul. The last thing Ethan felt was the icy grip of Father Malachi's hand closing around his wrist. Then the world dissolved into nothingness, the church's whispers swallowing him whole. By morning, the doors would creak open once more, waiting for the next curious soul to step inside, and the cycle would begin again. Emily had always been drawn to the forgotten corners of history. The faded ink of old letters, the crumbling walls of abandoned buildings, they whispered secrets to her, begging to be uncovered. So when the invitation arrived, slipped beneath her apartment door with no return address, she couldn't resist. The elegant, yellowed parchment bore only a few lines combed to St. Michael's Church at midnight. Document the service, the pastor waits. The church had been abandoned for decades, its name synonymous with eerie rumors and vanished visitors. Emily had read about it. How parishioners had disappeared during midnight masses, how the doors would lock themselves, how the bell tolled on moonless nights with no one left to ring it. Yet, the historian in her stirred with excitement. This was a mystery begging to be solved. Rain pattered against the cobblestones as Emily approached the church, her coat pulled tight against the chill. The iron gates groaned as she pushed them open, the sound too loud in the stillness. Above her, the church loomed, its spire piercing the foggy sky. The clock tower struck 12 just as she stepped onto the worn stone steps. A deep, resonant clang echoed through the empty square, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to vibrate. Inside, the church was impossibly preserved. Dust motes danced in the dim moonlight filtering through stained glass, and the pews stretched into the shadows like skeletal fingers. The scent of old wood and candle wax lingered, though no flame had burned there in half a century. Emily's breath clouded in the sudden cold as she adjusted her camera, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. The forgotten invitation had been a summons, and now, as the 12th chime faded into silence, Emily realized with a thrill of dread that she was right where someone, or something, wanted her to be. The heavy wooden door creaked shut behind Emily, sealing her inside the abandoned church with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and aged incense, the silence so profound she could hear the uneven rhythm of her own breath. As her eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows, she noticed them. Shadows where there should be none. Figures flickered at the edges of her vision, their forms barely perceptible, sitting motionless in the pews as if waiting for something. A whisper brushed against her ear, too faint to decipher, but the words carried an eerie weight. Then another, from the opposite side, like hushed voices passing secrets. The temperature plummeted, her breath curling in ghostly tendrils before her face. She clenched her trembling hands, forcing herself to move forward, each footfall echoing unnaturally loud in the hollow space. The church's history gnawed at her thoughts. Decades of missing people, vanished after midnight services just like this one. Then she saw it. A hymnal lay open on a pew, its pages yellowed and brittle. As she reached out, the book snapped shut on its own, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. A low, collective sigh rippled through the darkness, a chorus of unseen mourners. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. Whatever lingered here wasn't just memories. It was alive, and it was watching her. The moment the choir began, Emily's breath caught in her throat. The hymns swelled through the church, their melodies hauntingly beautiful yet profoundly wrong. There were no singers, no figures standing in the loft, no movement in the shadows. Just the disembodied voices wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. The harmonies were too precise, too layered, as if centuries of lost souls had joined their voices into one. At first, the words were familiar old hymns she'd heard in childhood, but then, slowly, insidiously, they changed. The cadence twisted, the lyrics shifting into something darker. A turn back, the hour is near, the gate will close, the lost appear. Emily's skin prickled. The air grew thick with the scent of old incense and something metallic, like dried blood. The pews, empty moments before, now seemed to flicker with the faintest outlines of figures, their faces blurred, their mouths moving in time with the choir. Were they singing too? Or was their silence worse? She clutched her notebook, her fingers trembling, the scribbled observations from earlier now feeling foolish, trivial. A gust of wind howled through the broken stained glass, and the choir's volume rose to a deafening crescendo. The words wrapped around her, slithering into her mind like a curse. Stay too long, join our song, never leave, forever grieve. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She wasn't just documenting history, she was being warned. The shadows in the corners of the church deepened, and for the first time, She felt eyes on her. She wasn't alone. And whatever was here with her didn't want her to leave. The air inside the church grew heavier as Emily hesitated before the confessional booth. The carved oak door stood slightly ajar, its hinges creaking as though beckoning her closer. From within, a voice, low and distorted, as if spoken through layers of static and time, murmured words she couldn't quite discern. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee, but the promise of answers to the church's sinister history rooted her to the spot. The whispers from the pews had grown relentless, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fractured prayers and sobs. Yet, this voice beneath the shadowed arch of the confessional was different, deliberate, purposeful. A step inside, it urged, the words slithering through the gaps in the wood. I know what you seek. The darkness inside the booth seemed to pulse, breathing like a living thing. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached out, gripping the edge of the door. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her with unnatural force, plunging her into suffocating blackness. The voice enveloped her, reverberating through the enclosed space, somehow both distant and inches from her ear. It spoke of the church's past, of disappearances, of rituals gone awry, of a congregation that had vanished without a trace. But with each revelation, the cold seeped deeper into her bones. A fingernail scraped against the divider. Then came the question, whispered so softly it might have been her own thoughts. Would you give yourself to know the truth? Emily's breath hitched. The cost of the bargain hung heavy in the air, unspoken but understood. The confession was never meant to absolve sin. It was a trap, laid long before she ever stepped foot inside. The air in the confessional grew thick, the scent of aged wood and damp stone mingling with something darker, something rotten. The shadowy figure leaned closer, its form flickering like a candle caught in a draught. Emily's breath hitched as the distorted voice finally took shape, words slithering into her ears like serpents. I was once the shepherd of this flock, it whispered, the tone shifting between reverence and malice. But the flock? They hungered for something more than salvation. The priest's face materialized for a fleeting moment. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, his skin stretched tight over bones as if he'd been starved for decades. His lips curled into a smile that didn't touch his empty gaze. They took my soul, he murmured, and bound it to these walls. Every midnight I must sing their hymns, feed their hunger. But you can take my place. Emily's blood ran cold. The whispers outside the confessional grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of pleas and curses. The priest's hand, skeletal and trembling, reached for hers. All you must do is say yes, he urged, and I will be free. You will become the new keeper of this house of echoes. Her mind raced. The disappearances, the ghostly choir, the way the church seemed to breathe around her, it all made sense now. The priest wasn't just trapped, he was part of a cycle, a ritual that demanded a fresh soul to sustain it. And she was the next offering. The weight of his desperation pressed against her, suffocating. If she refused, would he let her leave? Or was the choice already made for her? Outside, the choir's hymn twisted into a mournful wail, the words now unmistakable, join us, join us, join us. The priest's grin widened. Dawn approaches, he said, choose wisely. The air in the church had grown thick, pressing against Emily's skin like a suffocating hand. The priest's hollow eyes gleamed with a desperate hunger as he circled her, his spectral form flickering like a dying candle. You have until dawn, his voice slithered through the shadows, to choose wisely. The weight of his words settled over her, colder than the creeping frost on the stone floor. Emily's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the doors had vanished, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The whispers of the unseen congregation rose to a deafening chorus, their words twisting into a chant. Stay, stay, stay. She clutched her notebook like a talisman, flipping through pages of historical records she'd studied. There had to be a loophole, a way to break the curse. The priest's laughter grated like rusted hinges. You cannot outrun eternity, he taunted. But Emily spotted it, a faded inscription on the altar, nearly erased by time. A verse from an old hymn, one that spoke of forgiveness, not damnation. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words. If the priest was bound by the church's rites, perhaps he could be undone by them too. With a surge of resolve, she began to recite the hymn aloud, her voice cutting through the whispers. The priest's form wavered, his snarl twisting into a scream as the walls shuddered. The first light of dawn seeped through the stained glass, and the shadows recoiled. But as the church dissolved around her, the priest's final hiss followed, you carry me with you now. Emily stumbled into the morning air, gasping. The church stood silent behind her, but the whispers clung to her like cobwebs, threading through her thoughts. Dawn had come, but had she truly won? The first light of dawn crept through the shattered stained glass windows as Emily stumbled out of the church, her breath ragged, her legs trembling. The weight of the night clung to her like a second skin, the echoes of the priest's voice still ringing in her ears. She had outwitted him, barely, using the last of her strength to break the unholy bargain he'd tried to force upon her. But as she ran down the overgrown path, the church's iron gates slamming shut behind her, she knew it wasn't over. The whispers trailed her, soft at first, like the rustle of dead leaves, then growing louder, more insistent. They slithered into her thoughts, repeating the priest's final words, "You may have fled, but you will never be free." By the time she reached her apartment, the sun had fully risen, but the shadows in her home seemed darker, thicker. Every mirror reflected something just out of sight. A flicker of movement, a figure standing behind her. The whispers multiplied, filling the silence with hymns she'd heard in the church, their lyrics now twisted into something malevolent. Sleep offered no respite, her dreams were haunted by the confessional, the priest's gnarled hands reaching for her, his hollow eyes burning with vengeance. Days passed, and the whispers grew bolder, shaping themselves into words she could almost understand. Then, one night, she woke to the sound of singing, the same ghostly choir from the church now in her bedroom. The air turned icy, and the priest's laughter echoed through the darkness. Emily realized too late that escaping the church had only delayed the inevitable. The bargain had been made the moment she stepped inside. And now, the shadows had come to collect.